starts with Macbeth's first scene as king. It opens with Banquo questioning how Macbeth achieved all his prophecies and believes there was some foul play involved at the palace in Forres. Although he is suspicious, he is joyous that he will end up fathering a line of kings. He is then joined by the king in question, Lady Macbeth, Lennox, Ross, and other lords in attendance. Macbeth acts gracious to his face and invites him to a banquet that night, insistent that he comes. Banquo agrees. After this, a servant informs Macbeth that there are men waiting outside for him, and the servant leaves to let them in. In a soliloquy, Macbeth worries about Banquo's prophecies concerning his son's becoming king. He worries that he will be overthrown the same way he did to Duncan. His solution to this problem soon enters the stage in the form of two murderers. After some persuading, Macbeth convinces them to murder Banquo and his son Fleance that night. A strong theme of betrayal and ambition is present here, so strong that Macbeth is willing to have one of his closest friends and his son killed in order to retain his power. It also demonstrates Macbeth's beginning to be consumed by his power and becoming more desensitized to murder. Scene 2 is mostly focused on Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. In a moment alone, she admits that she is not as happy as she thought she would have been in this position. She is soon joined by Macbeth, who also admits to having a tortured mind about his fears from Banquo's prophecies. Through their fears for safety and mental turmoil, they agree to put on happy faces for their guests. Macbeth also does allude to planning something sinister, but does not reveal what it is to Lady Macbeth. This short scene helps to establish the starting point for many character traits of the main characters. It begins to show Lady Macbeth becoming affected by her guilt. It also marks the shift in the original power dynamic, as this is the first murder Macbeth has planned without the help or information from his wife. The third scene, although short, is an important plot point. The two murderers have met up in a park near the palace and are joined by a third murderer sent by Macbeth. The three engage in conversation but quickly quiet down when Banquo and Fleance arrive. They jump out and ambush the pair. Banquo was killed in the scuffle, but Fleance manages to escape and is not sought after by the murderers. Betrayal is on full display here, now having Banquo killed by murderers sent by his best friend. That is a deal breaker for a lot of people when it comes to defining Macbeth as a tragic character. In scene 4, the banquet has begun with the Macbeths, Ross, Lennox, lords, and other guests. The murderer returns and pulls Macbeth aside to tell him that the deed is done, but Fleance escaped. Macbeth doesn't really worry, as Fleance is not yet a problem, as the murderer leaves and Macbeth returns to the party. Lady Macbeth then urges her husband to make a toast, and just as he begins, the ghost of Banquo appears in Macbeth's seat. He begins to freak out, but the other lords question if Macbeth is okay. Ross comments that the king is unwell, and to curb suspicion, Lady Macbeth dismisses her guest's concern and says he's acted like this since his youth. Macbeth goes into his panic, and his wife attempts to basically tell him to get it together in front of all these people. With Banquo's ghost popping in and out, Macbeth is unable to recompose himself, and Lady Macbeth asks her guests to go home due to her husband not being well. Lennox wishes better health to the king as the lords leave. Macbeth does calm himself slightly. He tells his wife that he will go back to the Weird Sisters early tomorrow morning for more clarification on his prophecies. She then urges him to bed. Several themes are at play here, including host/hostess, supernatural, and appearance versus reality. It's a really great scene to demonstrate some of the key aspects that make Macbeth a unique play that can't be found in every other play. Scene 5 is another short one, but unique. We get an appearance from a minor character named Hecate, Queen of the Witches. She expresses her anger at the Weird Sisters for approaching Macbeth without her. She instructs them on how to deal with Macbeth whenever they see him again, telling the Weird Sisters to show him prophecies that lead him into a false sense of security that will lead to his destruction. The first witch, who has been listening this whole time, follows along with her. This is a good job of establishing themes of supernatural and appearance versus reality. The witches are going to give Macbeth this finely crafted appearance of safety, while in reality the forces against him are growing. The final scene of this act is short, with Lennox talking to another lord at the palace in Forres. The two are discussing all the current events in Scotland, sharing some deep suspicion of Macbeth after the deaths of both Duncan and Banquo. They both share relief that Malcolm and Donalbain are out of Macbeth's reach, however. The other lord tells Lennox that Malcolm has gotten the support of the English King Edward and General Seward. The lord also reveals that Macduff has fled to England as well and is putting together a military force to overthrow Macbeth. Although Macbeth is not in this scene, it reflects well on the current state of his character. He is actively losing the trust of the lords and thanes around him due to his suspicion and poor management of Scotland, resulting in several people actively working to overthrow his rule and many others questioning their loyalty to him. The first scene shows the final appearance of the witches, meeting in thunder around a boiling cauldron preparing a spell. Macbeth shows up and demands that the witches show him more prophecies. These prophecies manifest in the form of 3 apparitions: an armed head telling him to beware Macduff, a bloody child telling him that no man born of woman can harm him, and a crowned child holding a tree telling Macbeth that he will never be vanquished until Birnam Wood come to Dunsinane Hill. He feels pretty satisfied with himself in the sense of safety after hearing these prophecies, believing that the second and third one will protect him from harm. Soon the Weird Sisters vanish and Lennox appears, reporting that Macduff has fled to England. In response, Macbeth orders Macduff's wife, children, and servants to be killed. The theme of a supernatural is so strong here in my opinion. The witchcraft and vivid images that Macbeth sees about his future. Ambition is also very strong, showing the lengths that Macbeth is willing to go to punish his traitors. Scene 2 takes place in Fife, the location of Macduff's castle. His wife and son are discussing Macduff's abandonment of them after Ross informs them of Macduff's departure from Scotland. Lady Macduff is very upset, considering her husband to be dead to the family. This is one of 2 comedic scenes in the whole play between Lady Macduff and her son, almost to serve as a calm before the storm. Suddenly, murderers storm the castle and kill the son first before going after Lady Macduff and killing her too. I thought it was a really interesting choice to make one of the very few comedic moments also in this scene where one of Macbeth's most heinous actions occurs, in my opinion. Scene 4 takes us to a new country, England. Outside of King Edward's palace is Macduff and Malcolm. Macduff is attempting to persuade Malcolm to lead a military force against Macbeth and overthrow his rule. Malcolm is, rightfully so, not entirely convinced and thinks Macduff may have been sent by Macbeth. To test him, Malcolm pretends to be unfit for the throne, saying he's lustful and greedy, and at first Macbeth agrees to everything before expressing doubts in these ideas of his. Malcolm was convinced by his honesty and agreed to help restore Scotland to peace and its legitimate king. Soon, Ross joins them and reports the murder of Macduff's family to him. At first, he's in shock and grief-stricken. Malcolm tells him to convert his grief to anger to take revenge on Macbeth, and to which he agrees. There is some foreshadowing I can see in this scene, specifically to how Macduff is a growing presence in the plot. It hooks us as the audience to see if he takes his revenge in the final act. Act 5 is the climax of the story thus far. In Scene 1, Macbeth, they now live in Dunsinane. Here we see Lady Macbeth at the lowest point of her entire character. A gentlewoman is discussing her condition with a doctor. As they discuss, a sleepwalking Lady Macbeth appears, and in her state she discusses details of the murders that she and her husband are responsible for. The doctor is in shock of what he witnesses, saying that only God can help her now. The gentlewoman will continue to watch over her as she sleeps. I believe the theme of guilt is at its strongest here. Lady Macbeth has been entirely consumed by her guilt to the point where she cannot perform basic functions like sleeping. The murders she's responsible for have sent her on a downward spiral that she never manages to escape. The following scene is a shorter one. Scottish army generals and Lords Menteith, Angus, Lennox, Caithness, and soldiers are heading to Birnam Wood to meet up with Malcolm, Seward, and their group of English soldiers. Overall, the scene doesn't do much other than establish what is going on outside of the Macbeth's lives to add to the growing suspense of Act 5. Scene 3 takes us back to Dunsinane with a very unhinged Macbeth, the doctor, and other attendants. He notes that all of the lords are deserting him, but he is not worried because of the prophecies that he is sure will protect him. A Satan enters and reports that 10,000 English soldiers are on their way to Dunsinane, but he does not worry about this. He discusses Lady Macbeth's condition with the doctor, showing frustration that he cannot do his job and cure her. Personally, I think this is really showing the unraveling of his character, how he's starting to crack from the power that he has now. He is not concerned about his thanes leaving him, his wife's illness, or 10,000 soldiers ready to kill him. He's so built on his power that he cannot see how it's destroying him. Scene 4 is only about a page long, showing the English and Scottish forces joining together in Birnam Wood. Malcolm orders the soldiers to cut branches from the trees of Birnam Wood as camouflage as they continue to march toward Macbeth's castle. Very short, but establishes an important detail. One of the two prophecies Macbeth believes keeps him safe are falling apart, as parts of Birnam Wood are now moving towards his castle in Dunsinane. Scene 5 takes us back to Dunsinane's castle to Macbeth, feeling mighty and secure in his castle. Satan enters and reports that Lady Macbeth is dead. Macbeth's only response to this is that he does not have time to grieve and she should have died later. A messenger then enters and reports that Birnam Wood is now moving towards the castle. Macbeth is completely startled by this, immediately beginning to prepare for battle. I like this scene because it displays the height of Macbeth's character. He is so ready to fight for his power yet and is now completely unfazed by death. Like Lady Macbeth being consumed by guilt, Macbeth is consumed by power, and this obsession will lead to his downfall, just like how it did to his wife.
I didn't film anything for this scene because all it does is show the soldiers now outside Macbeth's castle with Malcolm and Seward leading a first attack with Macduff behind him. Pretty much doesn't do much. I don't like it very much. It just doesn't feel crucial enough to be its own scene.
Scene 7 shows the long-anticipated battle begin. Macbeth, confident that the second prophecy will protect him, leaves his castle and challenges the soldiers. Even while cornered by young Seward, he is still confident and manages to kill him. Macduff enters after the slaying, looking for Macbeth, showing his rage towards Macbeth. Seward and Malcolm enter, announcing that the castle as a whole has surrendered. All they need to do is kill Macbeth. The suspense of this scene really hits, and the betrayal and hunger for power start to culminate in this scene, but they only truly come into their own in the last final scene. The final scene of the entire play is full of suspense. Macduff finds Macbeth, and the two finally fight. In a moment of confidence, Macbeth gloats about his privilege and how no man born of woman can harm him. It is then that Macduff reveals that he was born via caesarean birth. A shocked Macbeth attempts to back out of the fight, but is then overpowered by Macduff. Macduff kills Macbeth and drags him off stage, while Malcolm, Seward, Ross, and other thanes and soldiers enter. Ross tells Seward that his son died in battle. Seward praises him as a brave soldier, and then shortly after, Macduff returns holding Macbeth's head. They take the crown off the decapitated head and hail Malcolm as Scotland's new king, as everyone heads off to Scone for the coronation. I think this was a really satisfying end of the play. It restored the throne back to its original heir, and especially showed the results of the drive for power. Although it can't take back all the awful things that were done by Macbeth, there's a sense of justice that can be felt by the conclusion of this play. I only wish we could have seen what happened to Fleance and the continuation of Banquo's prophecies and how it affected his children who were said to become kings. But overall, this was a far more interesting and rich Shakespeare play compared to the ones of our younger years.